Mr. Speaker.
Gentleman from Charlottesville, Mr. Toscano.
Mr. Speaker, I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Gentleman has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen in the House, we're about to embark on a special session to consider the budget, and of course, we know in addition to the various items that are in the budget that many of our constituents depend upon, that the biggest issue is going to be the question of whether we can figure out a way to close the coverage gap and try to bring back our taxpayer dollars that have been sent to Washington to the tune of $5 million a day. Throughout the general session, we tried to address a number of the legitimate concerns that people on the other side of the aisle have raised, from everything from the cost of the program to how fast we need to do a reform, to how fast we need to do an audit. We tried to address those concerns. We think we addressed those concerns, and so let me take them one step at a time. We tried to address the concerns about cost, long-term cost to the Commonwealth, and there was a long-term cost projection done at the request of the Merck Commission, which found that there were actually savings generated by us adopting a Medicaid expansion that closes the coverage gap, saving the budget by about $1.1 billion. The answer to our response on that point was that we still aren't ready to expand. It's another just say no. We try to respond to legitimate concerns about audits, because audits are a good thing. They help us find savings and try to improve programs. Of course, we've had about 63 audits of this program over the last 20 years, but that didn't seem to make much of a difference. So what did the governor do? He said, okay, yeah, let's do an audit. So we decided to do an audit, and what's the response? Just say no. We tried to respond to the legitimate concerns that people had, that we had to reform a system to save money and make it work better. So the Merck asked the McDonnell administration to put forward a number of reforms, from everything from dual eligibles to foster care to behavioral health. And the Merck Commission heard all those reform positions, adopted those reform positions, and we have now booked several $100 million in savings in this biennium budget that the McDonnell administration introduced. So we put reforms in place, and the response was to the question about whether we would then close the coverage gap was just say no. The McDonnell budget included a number of booked savings for Medicaid savings. Then we heard that there were some concerns that we would not be able to back out if we went forward with the proposed expansion to close the coverage gap. And they said, where are the assurances that Virginia can move forward and get out if something happens where the federal government does not live up to their side of the bargain? Now, put aside for the moment that in the 40, 50 years that Medicaid has been in place, the federal government has always lived up to their side of the bargain. But put that aside for a minute and ask yourself the question, I think it's a legitimate question, what would happen if the federal government bowed out? Well, the answer, as you heard today when the governor gave his speech, is in this form of this letter from CMS that says that consistent with their guidelines, if Virginia implemented an expansion of Medicaid coverage for 2 years and then dropped such a coverage at the end of the time period, there would be no financial penalty and no reduction to the federal matching dollar rates otherwise available to Virginia for its Medicaid program. So here is another piece of evidence, another response to what we've heard to be the concerns about not moving forward to coverage to close the coverage gap. Hopefully the response to this will not be, again, just say no. And finally, then, you might ask yourself the question, how does this impact the budget? Because we've heard time and time again, we want a clean budget, divorced from Medicaid. Well, ladies and gentlemen of the House, I would submit to you that we not just want a clean budget, we want a smart budget and we want a strong budget. And now, with the governor's proposal this morning, we have all three. It includes a 2-year pilot program for covering 400,000 Virginians who are not presently covered by insurance. It builds in $225 million in net savings by bringing our taxpayer dollars back to Virginia. It does not have a permanent obligation to close the coverage gap, but only for 2 years. And it takes the money that's saved in the budget and puts it in several different places. It sets forth a reserve fund so that if there are costs in the outlying years, we can afford to pay for those costs by setting this aside the monies today. It builds in new payments for teacher salaries, 2% increase, a 2% increase for state employees generally, $17 million for the Line of Duty Act, $8.9 million more for mental health, more money for pre-K funding, $5.4 million to our friends in Northern Virginia for cost to compete. So it takes the money that we have been arguing could be saved in our budget and reprograms that money to help our citizens with the services that they need and they want. So what is going to be the response from the other side? Hopefully it's not just say no again, because here is another concrete proposal for how we can do this. It's a good proposal. It deserves a debate. It deserves a vote. We hope that our friends on the other side can look carefully at this proposal. It shows to show you how it is a business-based approach to doing what we think a lot of us need to do, and that's to help cover those who are least able to cover themselves. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.